cloud. There we go. Thank you all for being here today. I am delighted to introduce Sam Nestor, who is a renowned trumpeter performing from New York City to Paris to Beijing. He's designed creative, interactive, and meaningful and accessible education programs for a number of organizations and institutions. When I heard about his incredibly cool installation, Arcadia, which is on the campus at George Mason University in Fairfax, I knew I wanted to invite him immediately to be a salon guest and to hear more about his artistic vision. So I told him earlier, I'm really excited about hearing directly from him. I mean, Arcadia is an environmental public art installation tapping into plants that generate sound and light. It's gorgeous lit up at night. As many of you know, I live over in Fairfax now, so that's kind of how I heard about it to begin. Meditations along with the music from it. And I just found out that right now, if I wasn't here, they're doing yoga outside on the lawn by it. So I'll try that maybe next week. So Sam, thank you for being here. We look forward to hearing about Arcadia, your other work, your process, and having a good discussion.
Well, thanks so much, Anne. That's such a nice introduction. It makes me, that was so wonderful. You make it sound like I know what I'm doing, which is really not the case. So thank you, and thank you so much. And I think, you were definitely saying something that that is important to me, and that is that, Arcadia is really, really wonderful, and I'm excited to share it today. But I really do, we were talking just before some other folks came on about children and music is something that I've also been really passionate about here, working with some arts education institutions, including the Juilliard School and Bridge Arts Ensemble. And so as we go through and talk about plants and light and sound and faraway lighthouses and some other strange things that we can talk about, I'll remind you that we were talking a moment ago and saying where we're all from in terms of the arts. Well, I am indeed a trumpet player. I'm a musician. And so essentially I come from the world of sound, making lots of it very loudly on the trumpet. And then kind of everything else falls in and around that. But I know, Anne, you were so kind to talk a bit about Arcadia, and I know that that's some of the stuff that I'm here to talk about. So I'd be happy to share. You can hear it from me, or you can hear it from me in a much more scenic environment. I can share a little video that talks a little bit about it. From where I was designing the second installation. So maybe I can go ahead and do that. And then for those who aren't as familiar with it, we'll hopefully get some information and have some wonderful questions for me that I'll pretend to answer. Let's see here. What do I do? Hit my share screen. Sound. Oh. So I think you should be able to see.
Yes, I'm seeing it.
And I think, do I mute? I can never remember if I'm supposed to mute or not.
That's an excellent question. I think you're okay.
Arcadia is an interactive sound installation that takes the natural biorhythms of plants and converts them to MIDI data to create a stream of non-repetitive music. What these devices do is take the galvanic conductance, a kind of electricity that's inside the plant, registered through the leaves, and convert it to this MIDI data, which will then control a MIDI instrument. And the plants are creating all of this by themselves, essentially a series of plants making music in real time. With all of the changes that are happening with the plants, the music will change, the pitch will change, the rhythm will change. Throughout the day, it changes with various environmental conditions. It changes whether the plants are healthy or whether they're sick, controlling the various musical elements within the installation. In addition to these, we have contact microphones that are wired throughout, attached to various other parts of the environment, and it allows participants who are coming through the installation to participate in the music making experience, turning the environment into a big musical instrument. This installation was first designed and installed at the greenhouse at St. Hilda's and St. Hugh's School on the Upper West Side in New York, and is now being further developed and explored here in a forest on Bruny Island as part of my residency for the Bruny Island Foundation for the Arts.
So that, I mean, I don't know if you could hear all of that, but that's the, that's a lot of what Arcadia is. I mean, it's funny to see it now a couple of years on, which I think that was in 2019. And I should also say, so the idea behind Arcadia is that there are these sensors and they're connected to plants. And now since that time, there's a whole bunch of different sensors because, there are a whole bunch of different plants doing wonderful things, and to be able to read what's happening inside them, or to read rather some of the things that we're reading to get this information, we need to access 2 points on a plant. And what's happening is all of this information we're reading from this plant, and it's coming through, and all of that information is being converted really very, very, very quickly, as if it was happening right in real time, into information that some software and some special designing and creating of instruments that I've done read that information, and it means something to them. So it means by certain things changing, it means that here is the note B5 and here is the note A4. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff happening that says, well, this is a really loud note, or this is a really long holding note, or those kinds of things. And that's being transferred into a computer, which then sends the sound right out. It's all happening really, really, really quickly. And so I know that Am is also interested in knowing, how it works a little bit. I should also say, with what's happening at George Mason, I can share a little more soon, some videos and some other parts of Arcadia is also developed so that not only is the sound happening, but connected to those sounds are specific lighting cues. So it's the idea of creating a synesthetic piece of art, whereas what you hear, you're seeing, or you see what you hear. So it's there connected. So every time, every time the note B5 happens, like a blue bulb comes up, for example, and depending on how the velocity of that change inside the plant depends on how bright that happens. And so if you connect multiple devices, we can create individual instruments and individual lighting cues, and they start to kind of bleed into each other and fill up. So you get this kind of wash of color and sound, and it's happening nonstop. So it's creating, it's a what we call a generative system, in the sense that it's generating all of this. It's generating all of this art, all of this music, all of this light, and it's doing it nonstop, continuously, and it'll just keep going as long as it's plugged in, essentially. And that's what's been happening at George Mason. And to give you a tiny little sense of what it looks like at George Mason with the light, I can share one more video. It's been doing this. We installed it at George Mason University October, actually. It opened in November. It was actually, I remember, it was in October that it was originally installed, the end of October. And so the light, you can see kind of what it looks like and what it's doing. And it's been happening since the end of October, continuously. It hasn't been turned off. So music and light is happening at that greenhouse the entire time. So we're seeing it at George Mason is inside their greenhouse. There is this really
something
large...
better for myself.
I was starting to get comments from well-meaning
that might be my YouTube
would say to me.
Continuing. Sorry. What's happening is there's a big shelves. There are these shelves of plants that are being grown inside the greenhouse of George Mason. And behind them is a screen, a big white screen. And between that screen and the back of the shelf are LED lights that I've placed along that you can't see. You can only see them reflecting off of the white background. And so everything that's happening there is happening live, and the plants are growing and they're being taken care of by the people who are inside the greenhouse. And there's a whole bunch of other activities that are surrounding this particular project. I mean, it's all being, because of COVID and social distancing, it's all being viewable online. So right now there's a little web address. If you went to that web address, you could see what's happening inside that greenhouse right this very moment. And you can see, it is indeed quite bright out there now at 5 p.m. So it's not as exciting to see the lights until it gets a little darker. But it's making music and you can hear it coming directly from the computer. You can see it happening live right now. So
one of the things that struck me as you played that clip from the greenhouse was I just felt like my blood pressure went down. It was so it hadn't occurred to me that the university was doing the meditation and yoga with it, but now I see that it's just a perfect match. I really just enjoyed breathing for a minute.
Thank you. I definitely, I think there are, thank you. I think there are so many ways of looking at it and approaching it. And that's, it seems to have had that effect. And I should also say, George Mason has been really wonderful in connecting with so many different departments and players at the university who have, found ways of engaging with it in various ways. As Anne was saying, there's yoga happening right now. Beside it. So I think I'm not sure if they put a little speaker, or something outside the greenhouse, or they stream it so they can hear what's happening, but also they're kind of, basking in the light out there, which is really nice. And, there have been concerts. People have taken the audio that's come from it, asked for clips of it, and that's been sent out to people. And they've used that and then the idea of the installation to be inspired to create new works, new musical works. In fact, there's a concert coming up or a performance coming up at George Mason by some of the students and faculty. And they've taken this audio and they've watched the Twitch stream, and various things have come out of it. There've been new pieces of poetry for our wonderful poets here. They've been inspired by it that are being performed in a couple of weeks. It'll be online via Mason Arts at Home. And inside that concert, there's also dance performances along to it, as well as a visual artist who's listening to the Twitch stream and has listened to those things and used it kind of as a time-based thing to then film herself, being inspired by it as she goes, standing out in her garden or somewhere, and kind of painting a new piece. So there's a new visual art piece that's in response to it as well, that's been finished.
That's incredible. I've written down about 100 questions, and I promise not to subject everyone to all of them. But one of the things that I was thinking when you were talking about seeing what you hear was about synesthesia and that, sense of overlapping senses and perceptions of things with senses other than what you might expect, which I don't know. I feel like I experienced that to some degree, but not to the extent of having it be as tangibly present as what you've created. But I was wondering if you've had thought about that or how that came into it.
Definitely, thank you. One of the things that I wanted to do right after developing it first was make a light installation, so that because what we're doing is we're taking, and this is at the heart of the whole thing, is it's taking data and it's turning that data into something else. What it's doing is it's saying, here, you want to if we can capture information that's happening inside a plant, it's something that we cannot see that's happening inside a plant. What we're seeing mostly or hearing is the way that like water is being transferred. So conductance as well. In fact, it's a lot like a lie detector. It's very much like a lie detector is what's connected to those plants. They've yet to lie to me, but it's definitely, that's the kind of thing that's happening, let's say, if we were to simplify it down. And so it's following along as if, we could put that little graph and you could see like the peaks and troughs and when it gets big, and like that's what's happening. And all of those peaks and troughs are being turned into something. And we've said, well, that one means this and this one means that. And so we're hearing that. So if we can do that, we could do it and make it into anything. And so the goal was, well, let's make it into let's do this light. I really like the idea of light installations. And so I thought, well, is there a way of doing it so that we're going to do that? And if we're going to do that, why wouldn't we do the same connection? So right now, the music you're hearing that's coming from it, we also are controlling to some level that, it could be any kind of music. It could be in 12 tone. It could be in some very strange or musical mode. So there is the human choice, obviously. So we're choosing to say, this is the musical scale that it could be making things in. And then my goal is to make that as big and broad as possible, really highs, really lows, everything in between, but it's still within a musical mode, which just means that only certain notes can happen. In our own music, we only have 12, and then so we can do that, but we can also shrink it down or change it. And so we've done that. So, it's working. Essentially, the plants are composing in this musical mode. And so the light then is being the same thing. What we've pushed into the musical mode, we've now pushed into the light mode, let's call it. And so that's the goal. So every time the note C4 happens, it is going to be blue. And depending on something that happens, it's how long the blue stays on for, or how quickly it comes up, etc. And so if we connect multiple, that's what we do. We have primary colors, and they're only primary colors. So that what's happening is what you're seeing. You see all of these changes and all of these different kinds of fields of light happening. It's because you're seeing two plants. You're seeing what you're hearing in the music, which is what's happening in those two different plants. Does that make sense? I'm sorry, that was so confusing.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
that actually really helps me, because I was really thinking about what is it really? I majored in biology, so I should understand what plants are doing inside. And I was like, galvanized conductivity. I was just having a hard time really figuring it out. So I feel like you've explained well what it could be. And I'm really curious to know that it's all primary colors. I hadn't thought about that. I thought all the lights were pink and purple and blue. And no, that's really cool.
Yeah, right. So all those pinks you see are actually only because they're being mixed. And which is just really, really, which is the thing that I really love about it. And this is one of the things I really love about many of the things that I like to make, or some of my ideas, is generative systems. So you make a system and then you let that system run and it makes something. So you're the creator of the system, but then the moment the maker of the system finishes it or sets that system going, the maker immediately becomes an audience member, because I can't tell you what's about to happen. I can tell you the variables that go into creating it, but there's no way I could guarantee or predict what's happening next. Like you could if you were, if you wrote a piece of music down and you said, play this thing exactly, as I've written it, which is another big portion of my career. This is rather saying, here's the manuscript and here are some of the rules. You make it and let me see what's happening.
It's even different from improvisational jazz or something where, you've got riffs or chunks of pieces of music or even chords that are already sort of the elements that are going into it. It's like you only have the notes and they go together in certain ways, but you can't. I love that idea that it's non-repetitive.
Yeah, right. I mean, or at least it's non-repetitive in or maybe the next few generations and generations in that way, because it won't ever repeat exactly the same way. As in, it won't happen the same things that are happening. It's very unlikely. But because it's also infinite, it also means eventually it's also going to play a Mozart symphony, which is also really exciting. It's like, I mean, so,
I'm dying to hear what Tara is thinking. actually.
I mean, my mind was just going, I was thinking about cage and chance and indeterminacy but also sort of the overlap of the role of programming in setting up that system that can then become its own self-perpetuating kind of, instrument, or it's like you've turned the whole entire greenhouse into an instrument. I don't know. Do you think about those ideas of indeterminacy and chance and
all the time? Yeah, absolutely. As in to say, that's great that you brought that up, because I love that. I love cage. I also really love the Fluxus movement of the 1960s and all of those things. It's like making it a big event score down there. It's like here, and then seeing what happens. And I think definitely, and I think you've hit a really big and philosophical thing for anyone who makes something, whose potential outcome is built on a system, is that role of control and surrender, and how much you can control and how much it is chance, and those kinds of things. I'm very open about those things. I don't, as in to say, like, Anne knows much more about plants than I do. That's the truth. She has a biology. I don't know anything. I just had an idea and I followed it through to this. If you ask me about something else with plants, I am not a botanist, and that's really the truth. So I know what I know, and then I don't know anything else. If that makes sense. But when it comes to the kind of like creating a system, and again, I created the system. I modified parts of other systems to make it too. This isn't all completely brand new. No, I also don't know I don't know the individual, microchip components for lie detectors now. So all of these things are coming from all of that system. So in some ways, it's universe. It's the universe chance to say, I walked past an educational greenhouse here in Manhattan, and I thought, well, that's just the most incredible thing. It's like here, we're in a city that is, this big urban environment. There is this beautiful glass house on the roof of a school teaching children about sustainability, teaching children about horticulture. And I thought, and it was so beautiful. And it's all glass. So you look out over the skyline, and then children are coming in to learn how to grow a tomato, or what it means, sustainability means in the real, like and what dirt is and worms are, and the role they play on a rooftop. And I thought, that's just so beautiful. And so that moment was like, I know I want to do something here. I know I want to make a sound installation, and I want to enact the same sense of awe and wonder that I had just seeing and thinking about this educational idea. And then I thought, well, these plants are, how can we connect, how can we make it so that we turn it back around and have the plants do all the talking? And then that's where this went down. It's like, so let's make it so that when children come in, or when the very discerning art world of New York City comes in, it's like there is this moment where it's like, well, wait a second, what's happening? It's everything is being controlled and made by the plants. Everything in here is that's them kind of, giving them a megaphone in some ways and screaming back at you in a really, hopefully in a pretty way. So I think chance, in terms of universal chance, happened in terms of this project. Because there are things that I know, and there are things that I have learned so much, and I failed so many times along the way to get it to even as far as I failed today with it. This is recording, but that's fine. I don't care if anybody hears this. I failed today. I have another installation opening up of Arcadia on 14th Street in a few days in New York City. I recently received an eco art project prize along with some other US-based artists, and so they asked me to put a little installation in there, and I was down there, and it was all in. It was only yesterday. I said, I'm going to go down there and check it out again. And so I then, and they don't know this yet. Well, hopefully they won't watch this, but part of the floor in the installation is metal. And so I was like, okay, great. Well, I'm leaving, and I'm going to water the plants, which of course I'm going to, because they all just came, and I just went shopping, and perfect. And then all of a sudden everything went dead. And I couldn't figure out what was wrong with the system. And then I've realized, of course, the floor at the bottom of it is metal, and we're talking about conductance. When we find how things travel, we read it within the system of a plant, 2 parts within a system. So if 2 plants are sitting on a steel floor and the water has run through them onto that steel floor, it just went dead, because of course suddenly it has, we're crossing all of these all of these things. I'm also not an electrical engineer. It took me a while to realize, oh, all right, I probably shouldn't do that. I have to put it on here and those kind of things. But as for the musical chants, that's definitely one that's interesting. I think here I made the conscious choice at the time to make it within certain musical parameters because there has to be some. And here's like where the romanticism, it doesn't die, but it takes a moment of pause. Those plants, I want to say this in the right way, that's not their music. Oh, it is their music. It's more like you build a system and you teach them, this is how you can make music. And you can make it however you want within this system. I don't know if they were to make music, would it be within our Western musical idea, our Western idea of music? So there is control in the system where I could even give it even some more, let's say, but at some point you have to make that decision where you are the creator and where you step off the control and surrender. And I think for me, that is a delicate one, but in this case, one that you have to make nonetheless.
So, the result, the experience that we have is this very peaceful, lowering the blood pressure, soothing. You can do yoga to it. And so that's also a choice, right? So as a trumpet player, why wouldn't you have chosen a trumpet sound? Or, you could choose anything, right? And so you did make a choice about what you wanted to, about the experience you wanted people to have.
Definitely. The instrument, the choice of instrument, that's true. We could have it play trumpets, oboes, we could have it play an orchestra, play theorbos, we could have it play whatever, harpsichords, and we can. And when we were doing it, I did for a while change them all the time. But then I also realized I don't want anything that is recognizable. This is a new instrument for a new idea, a new instrument for a new thing. So the sounds that are coming from them have absolutely been designed specifically for them. So that's why there's some bell-like stuff. There is a sample in there that has been modified so much that it's completely new. And there's this thing called a pad. It's like that kind of electric wash that you hear sometimes that's in there. And it wanted to be that because I didn't want it to sound like a trumpet. Absolutely, definitely not. Because I can already do that. I didn't want them taking my job. No, it's that, it's more that I didn't, it is that awe and wonder factor. And for me, it's like, it is somehow getting like this idea of creating something that gives that. And I feel like if you're going into a familiar experience with plants, but having a completely new experience with art, I think that's kind of where it is. I think at least that is for me. And as for the very pretty and nice, I will say that's not, even in the current system, that's not always what comes out. It's very fortunate it mostly does, but another huge failure, other than the big electrical one that I had downtown today. But another big failure was when I did start making it and I had these devices, made and shipped over from this other engineer in Germany, using material and ideas that someone else here in the United States had thankfully designed and offered away for open source. That means free for anyone to take and modify and change. And so when they came, I was very excited. I've been working, but at the same time, I was like, we'll see. And so I started connecting it to an orchid that I had in my house here, in my apartment. I stay in Manhattan. And I connected it and everything was fine. All of the kind of musical mode and sounds great. And what I got from this was this terrible repetition on one note. And it was just insistent, it was really insistent, really arrhythmic. So it wasn't very, and I thought, oh, okay. So, my programming and some of my thoughts are wrong. So I worked for days and nothing. It was just again and again and again. And it was awful. And I was like, well, okay, it was a nice idea. And it was a stretch anyway. So I thought, okay, it's probably not going to happen. Then somebody brought me some cut flowers, some very fresh, nice cut flowers. And I put them in the apartment. And then I thought, I haven't changed it from the orchid. I changed it to the cut flowers that we just recently cut them in water. And all of a sudden, the same programming came up with all of this beautiful stuff. And it comes back to what's happening inside those plants. That orchid, like orchids that I have, I do love plants and I'm very good with plants, but this particular orchid, it was on its way out. It wasn't feeling, it's still here actually. I still, revive it once in a while, but it was very sick. It was very unhappy. There were things happening inside it. It was very unhealthy. And so what you were hearing was indeed the speed at which that water and the stuff inside it was being transferred and figured out. And there were issues with that plant. So it is this idea that even though we're in the sound world that has the potential to be really like big and nice and relaxing, if it is, if it also doesn't necessarily come out that way. It's dependent on the person playing these instruments, or rather the plant playing these instruments. So there is going back to that chance part. There's a big part to that.
But not random chance though, because it's dependent on what's really happening.
Right. Absolutely. That's right. Exactly. It's like saying, here's the system to make music, or here's this instrument, and you're going to play it how you wish to play it. And how you play it is you have to be alive. And depending on how you are alive and the time of day, because things do shut down, systems do slow down and speed up, and you can hear it change over the course of the day, so.
It's a really good lesson for self-care though, because I can picture this gorgeous orchid, this showy, and what you expect from it was not what the orchid wasn't feeling well. And like, I just think that's really interesting. And the orchids are just so beautiful. It's like, that's a good kind of picture for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Poor orchid, I feel so terrible. But like I said, she's come again, so it's all fine. She's forgiven me.
Sam, I'd like to hear a little bit about in the video where you were in the forest and at the school, you talked about people being able to interact with it. Do you do that at the installation at George Mason, and how does that work?
Great question. And I'm glad you brought that back up, because I meant to mention that was pre-COVID video. So people interacting with things, unfortunately, has changed. But thankfully, they do interact at George Mason, but not in the way it's in that video, not in the way it was ever originally designed, or at that time I was designing even more. And that's all of these wonderful things that George Mason has done, and some other ways. I have another installation other than here. There's one coming up in June in Australia of Arcadia. And also I'm heading to Hawaii in June to play with the same material, to go play with the forest over there. But the sensor stuff that you see, where it was like you can touch something and you can launch something, because it's picking up the fact that you're touching it and it has a big enough board, so suddenly a rock makes a sound, suddenly a tree makes a big sound. That's not happening because at the time when all of this was developing, we just couldn't fathom that it was going to be. But what George Mason has done, and I'm very thankful to George Mason for encouraging it, is indeed this online world, where you can go in and it's a secret life of plants. You can really kind of, go and be a plant voyeur any time of the day. And what that means is you can also get that information, you can get that sound, you can get that light, and you can make something with it. And that's what's been happening at George Mason. So they have been interacting. They've been interacting in the sense that they've been using it as, let's call, some base material for generating something else new. And so there have been all of these wonderful events in that way. And the head of the greenhouse there is also using the information and the data to find ways of tracking the health and the growth of particular plants. So they're interacting in that way. And then, of course, the yoga and the meditation, which is very nice of them to and that was all, of course, theirs to come up with and design. So they're interacting that, but unfortunately, there's not so much touching of things at the moment.
What about the environment, like when you're out in the wilds as opposed to the controlled atmosphere of the greenhouse? How does that affect the data that you collect?
That's a really good question. And that's one that comes up a lot, actually. And it is because it's the right question, I think. And interestingly, I think for me, I think if I were to, and again, this is where we have to be not careful, but I'm being careful. I am an artist and not a scientist. So I will say that I think if I were to really want to publish a really clever article to be peer reviewed about plants and the health of plants, I think I'd need to do it for a very, very, very long time to get enough information. And I think so right now it's definitely about the state of the plant or the health of the plant, rather than let's say that plants plants and forests in Australia, they don't play AC/DC, and plants here, they don't play Mozart symphonies. That's not yet, but I don't know. I think that's a good question, and that's the right one. I think being at George Mason for one full year, I think that's a really good tell. If we could just do more 1 year installations in places, I think we'd have even more. I wish I could answer that question even better. Sorry.
I was just thinking what you said about the cut flowers. That sounded almost like a death song or something you were talking about.
Right. You could absolutely make that happen.
I was thinking that too, actually. Those cut flowers are struggling for their life.
I know. It's so true. It is so true. But one of the things, before I also wanted to mention, I don't want to steal away another question, because these are really great questions. And so far, I've tricked you into thinking I know what I'm talking about, but or at least I think I have. But one of the things I like about it as well is the art side of it. It is the interest, but it seems to be for the period of time there is an interest in in it being an environmental art installation, because even at the very base line of it is what we're doing is we're moving something that is traditionally for us, at least now, in the background, from the background, and putting it in center stage and saying, this thing is really important. This thing is making this stuff. This thing is the thing you're actually being excited by right now. And so hopefully it is unlocking other ideas, ones that maybe were not necessarily that original goal. And I think, at least for me, I'm finding that a really nice endeavor. And this one down in 14th Street is actually, has really been, there's a frame around it in some ways. So the plants are really kind of in center stage. And I think that's a really important thing, especially now. I think there's been a more return, a lot of longing to return to nature during our COVID time, but also just in terms of what we're seeing in the current state we are, that due to what we are doing, just by being and continuing to be in multipliers, we're having now starting to have a quite obvious adverse effect on certain things and on our environment. And I think anything that puts that into center as a centerpiece is a really wonderful and important thing. And at George Mason, I should also finish by saying that part of the design of the installation was that all of those plants were purchased and they were being grown there, and they're growing to a certain level. And in a year's time, part of the deal with the installation was that at the end of it, when I take some of my equipment and we pack it up and say it's no more, all of those plants, because they're native plants, are going to be permanently planted inside and around the George Mason campus. And it's, again, that idea that thing that you saw in there is also just that thing that you sometimes ignore out here, and moving them into different roles. Yes.
Sam, I know they sorry, go on, Carol.
I had put it in the chat, but I just wondered, have you ever thought of combining the music, even though it's not really, repetitive, doesn't repeat itself, with a sort of ethereal meditative art exhibit, so that as the people are looking at the art, they're hearing this very peaceful meditative music? I didn't know if you had ever done that.
I think that's great. Carol, do you want to set up an installation? I'll put the music in for you.
No, I just would love going through an art exhibit, a peaceful kind of ethereal art exhibit with that kind of music as I walk through. it would be a different experience than just looking at the art. So I just wondered if you had ever thought of doing that.
I like it. I think that's a great idea. You thought of it, and I'm going to steal that idea. That's perfect. The one that's happening down on 14th Street it's a little group exhibition. So there are 5 artists. There are 4 artists and there's me, but there are 4 visual artists, and then there's my Arcadia installation. There's a version of it down there. So if you go down there, you can go and see it. You can go see what's happening in Arcadia. You can go spend time there. But all that sound also bleeds into the rest of the little gallery. So I guess, I mean, you're going to hear it live. So and it's the first thing you see. So maybe that's a little bit like what you're talking about. You get to hear it and see it, and then as you walk around the rest of it. But I think, Carol, I don't know if you were an artist. Is that right as well? Well, first of all, everyone's an artist, so.
Well, I'm a closet artist. Whatever.
The next time you have a piece that's ready, you let me know, and I'll see the theory.
Well, Carol, you are an artist, and not only that, you're an artist who works with plants, because before we were in COVID times, when we had monthly First Friday receptions, you were the person who did our flower arrangements.
Oh, I forgot that. Yeah.
So I think you guys are a match made in heaven.
That's right. Absolutely. You'll sell more flowers as well or something. No.
Sam, how long is the exhibition on 14th Street?
It's only a couple of weeks. It's a pop-up exhibition. It ends at the end of the month. It's for Earth Day. There's an Earth Day initiative, and these artists have received it. So it opens on Thursday, I believe, and it runs through to the end of the month. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. I was thinking I may not get up to New York City the next couple of weeks, but if it was going to be like all summer long, there is a chance.
Of course. Well, I'll send you a video or a photo or something from it.
That would be great. I know there's probably a bunch more questions. I want to ask one final question about your just other things that you do, but does anybody else want to jump in? It's funny, we always try to cut off, after about 45 minutes or so, because it's, we always leave people wanting more, and then it's just a great discussion. But I would like to end, if anybody else doesn't have a question now, with, I was reading on your website about some of the other things you've done and tying your musical work to thunderstorms, to cloud patterns, to lighthouses. Can you give us just a little bit about that so people can go look it up on their own when we're done?
Sure. I mean, sure thing. I think, I guess for me, that's a good one. I don't really know how to answer that except to say, yes, there is definitely pieces of music all about an incredible thunderstorm. You go check that out. There's a thunderstorm that happens in Australia. It's a very special one called Hector. Hector is a thunderstorm that happens almost every single afternoon, between September and March or May. I can't remember if it's March or May, I think. Above a place called the Tiwi Islands in the Northern Territory. And the people who live there on the island, locals, they set their time to it, their watch to it. It's that frequent. It's one of the most consistent, very large thunderstorms in the world. It's very special. In fact, I don't know if you noticed, thunderstorms don't have names, but Hector has a name. Anyway, so it's really interesting. So, being inspired by that and thinking about this and using some things, I wrote a piece about that thunderstorm that's for a brass ensemble that I play with here, that's using the footage of this incredible Australian videographer and filmmaker named Murray Fredericks. You should have him on; he's fabulous. But
we're on it.
And then the installation that you saw me walking through the forest, I was actually spending a month on an island off the southern coast of Tasmania. So I don't know if this is very Australian centric today, but that's all the way at the bottom of Australia. So it's an island at the base of an island, off an island really. But there's a lighthouse at the very end of it. And I spent a month in there exploring. It was convict settlers who were forced to build it to gain their freedom. So I spent some time recording in there and recording some other musicians from Australia in there, and also interviewing people who live on the island. One of the things I'm very much interested in is oral history as art and how we can incorporate that into musical pieces. So in fact, I have another project coming out this year where I traveled 320 miles north of the Arctic Circle to interview some people who live in a very remote town, and went with a friend and videographer to film that town. And then I also traveled to one of the most remote towns here in northern Alaska. And then I traveled to a town in Outback Australia, one of the most remote towns in Outback Australia, and interviewed people. There's 100 people who live in this town, but I asked the police officer when I was interviewing, like, how big is your beat? You know, how big is the area you look after? So there's only 100 people, very small, except because it's huge out there in the Outback. He said, well, technically, I'm supposed to look over something the size of England. So that's how kind of remote and in the middle of nowhere it was. And so I was really interested, before remote meant what we're doing right now, I was really interested in finding out, well, what is a life of real remoteness and isolation in the 21st century? So going and finding those places and talking about sound, interviewing them and hearing what they had to say, being inspired by the place, and then making something of it. And that's kind of what, I guess, some of the things I'm really interested in. I was really interested in being inspired by a thunderstorm, or this lighthouse, being inspired by place and by the people who connect with that place, and then, adding something to it and then calling it my own, or calling it art, I guess.
Wow, I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much. We always end with a little toast, and I want to give, if anybody has a final comment or a question before we close it up. I don't want to cut anybody off.
I just want to say thank you. That was awesome. I'm so glad to learn more about your work and your process, Sam.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. And I really want to see some of your work too. I know you were saying you work with your husband on, it sounds a really incredible thing, mixed media and 2D and 3D. Please send me some. Also, I don't know if you have my email. I'm happy to share it around. And if there are people who didn't want to ask questions, you can always write.
I've been on your website, so your email's there, right?
It is.
Okay, good.
Don't spam me. No, I'm just kidding. Exactly. My email, my social security number, it's all there.
Well, I can vouch for the fact that you are going to be very interested in Tara's work. She's wonderful and incredibly creative and incredibly such a wide range of what you do, Tara. So I'm excited. No, not at all. And I'm really excited to have you two connect right here. And I guess you probably have never been here to the Eastern Shore of Maryland, Sam. But I grew up here. We're on a river that is a tributary of the Chesapeake Bay. And I grew up on a farm right next to the river. And we, in the summertime, had a thunderstorm every single afternoon, just like you're talking about. Not as big, I'm sure, and it didn't have a name, but you could see it coming up the river every afternoon. It would be so hot and humid until it just burst and cooled everything off for 5 minutes, and then it would get hot and humid again. And one of the interesting things that I've noticed, I grew up here, left, came back after many years, and it doesn't seem to happen in that same consistent pattern anymore. So I am really interested in that. And I'm also really interested to learn about, I never heard of this Hector in Australia, but I'm gonna.
That's my French bulldog. Chosa. Okay, buddy, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Oh.
He wanted some attention. He didn't have any.
Well, I don't know why he hasn't been here all along.
It was perfect timing. You were saying something so wonderful and profound, and he decided to howl.
I really wasn't. I was just, I was saying I want to learn more about this Australian thunderstorm phenomenon.
And I really, first of all, that's really beautiful. And how wonderful is it, the experience of being able to predict something as big and sometimes scary as a thunderstorm, and also see it and that kind of magnificence that, rolling in. It's really one of those still, like, we as people who are now trying to colonize Mars or something crazy, are still awed as individuals when faced with something like that. And I think that's I think that's a really special experience. And do look up Hector Thunderstorm, and do look up Murray Fredericks. If you watch that video, it's his video. It's not my video. His video, my sound, my music, his video. But he's an incredible photographer and time lapse. I mean, truly out of this world. And if you look up his work, it's really, really beautiful. Yeah,
that's great. Well, I we could talk for another 4 hours, and I can't tell you how grateful we are that you have been willing to spend this time with us, and we would love to have you back anytime if you want to tell us about another project. And I just really appreciate it. And you've given me a perfect toast, because I had already decided that I wanted to make a toast to awe and wonder, which you have brought back up, and the many, many different ways that those emotions can wash over us, positive, negative, quiet, loud. So I'm going to be thinking about that. So thank you, Sam, to awe and wonder. Cheers. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Please.
Awe and wonder. I actually have a line.
I wish I had known the memo. I'm just kidding.
Thank you, Sam, for being here. And thank you all for coming. It was really interesting to hear everybody's perspective and discussion.
Thanks so much.
Absolutely.
Cheers. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.